So hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And in this video we're going to do something funny but also a bit crazy maybe. Because I'm going to install Windows 98, the legendary operating system of the late 90s, on a 2000s era PC. So you'd like to see if I really got it running? Then watch this video. A short introduction to my system. It's an Acer TravelMate 4062, a machine that was clearly designed for Windows XP, and still, with some effort, it just barely works on Windows 98. And the processor is from the Intel Centrino platform. It was clearly designed for Windows XP or 2003, and this is not ideal for Windows 98, guys. In fact, it's already too new in many ways. But that's exactly what makes it interesting and why I want to try if it might work. The common question is, can Windows 98 run on modern hardware? And the short answer is no, it can't. Windows 98 works best on systems from the late 90s and maybe from the early 2000s. Especially designed systems for Windows XP or Windows 2000 still had a little bit of backward compatibility. But after around the year 2005, the things got much harder. There were no proper drivers, there were ACPI issues, there were SATA controllers instead of IDE controllers, and USB was behaving very differently to before. So this laptop sits right on the edge of what's still possible. The biggest problem, ACPI and the blue screen. I had one major problem during the installation process. ACPI stands for Advanced Configuration and Power Interface. It's a more modern way for the operating system to manage power, to detect hardware and things like sleep modes. Windows 98 technically supports ACPI, but not very properly. And on this machine, the result was simple. A blue screen during setup every single time. And it really drove me crazy, guys. The solution was to force 98 to ignore the ACPI completely. And that was done, guess what? By starting the setup procedure with an option. And this option is called setup/p and I. This tells Windows 98 to skip ACPI detection and use older, more basic hardware. Without this option, installation was impossible. And with it, setup finally completed. Out of the box, Windows 98 runs at very low resolution. To fix that, I used a tool called Display Doctor. And surprisingly, it was able to detect the Graphics Media Accelerator 900, the graphics card of this laptop. And that allowed me to run a system with 2024 pixels and 16-bit of color depth. That's actually pretty impressive for Windows 98 on this kind of hardware. Sound, USB and missing drivers. Not everything worked, of course. The Realtek sound chip refused to cooperate. I couldn't get it to work, no chance. And the USB mass storage devices like USB sticks and things like that, they didn't work either. And that's very typical for Windows 98 on newer systems. You have to do a lot of workarounds. So I burned DVDs and used them to install software and tools. It was the only way to install the system and the drivers and tools that I needed. I couldn't use USB sticks. Everything had to be done in old school style. It's a nice reminder of how we used to solve problems before the plug-and-play era. Now, a few facts on Windows 98 and why it was so popular for such a long time. One reason Windows 98 stayed popular for many years is something that sounds simple today, but it was incredibly important back then. It had real MS-DOS support. Windows 98 wasn't just a graphical operating system, it still had DOS in its core. And you could boot straight into real DOS mode, run classic DOS games, old tools and hardware-dependent software without emulation. And that mattered really a lot. In the early 2000s, many people still played DOS games. And the tool DOSBox, the emulator that you might know, as we know it today, it didn't exist and it wasn't really an alternative at the time. Performance was limited and compatibility was rough, and many games simply worked better on real hardware like Windows 98. That's why many users ran 98 as a second partition on their hard drive, even years later. So they had one partition for XP and one partition for 98 with DOS for gaming. It was the best of both worlds. And Windows 98 wasn't just an update, it fixed a lot of everyday frustrations. Compared to 95, it had much better USB support, improved hardware detection, better handling of the FAT32 file system, and a more stable desktop experience. So Windows 95 was revolutionary, but it was also very rough. And Windows 98 felt like the best version of 95 somehow. And this is why most people upgraded as soon as they could. Of course, 98 had some problems. It had a lot of driver issues everywhere. Installing the wrong driver could easily destroy your system. And yes, many people reinstalled Windows 98 regularly because something broke. And I could tell a lot of stories about this because it happened to me too, a lot of times. But strangely enough, that was part of the experience. You learn a lot of your system and how it worked. You experimented, you fixed some things, maybe it broke again. It wasn't boring at all. So Windows 98 wasn't perfect, but it had personality. It was flexible, hackable, and really fun, even when it broke, and that's why people still remember it so fondly. So yes, Windows 98 can run on a 2000s hardware, but it's quite a challenge. So if you enjoyed this hands-on demo, give it a like, subscribe my channel, and let me know in the comments what system you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching.